what we think we're seeing that's emerging here is perhaps a three-way race, with Trump and Cruz representing the insurgents at the Republican gate, and Marco Rubio counting on becoming the candidate of the faction he needs, but is reluctant to acknowledge the Republican establishment. I caught up with Senator Rubio in Greenville, South Carolina yesterday, and I began by asking him if Donald Trump has been good for the Republican Party and for Rubio's candidacy.
Obviously, I don't agree with everything he says. There's a lot that we have a difference of opinion on, but we can't ignore that he's touched on some issues that people are concerned about. If you look at the statements he made this week, obviously I think he made them partially to recapture the limelight after having lost it. And I do think we've lost some of the focus on the attacks in San Bernardino and focused on a plan that isn't really a plan and is never going to happen. But he is reminding us in that process that people are really upset and they're really scared. They're worried. And I think the president made things worse last Sunday with his speech, not better. And you know, that's what he's focused in on.
You called his comments offensive and outlandish. That's a lot different than the tone you just took with me right now.
Well, it's offensive and outlandish in the sense that, for example, it's not going to happen, number one. I think it violates a lot of the things that we think about our country, but also the practical reality that in order for us to identify homegrown violent extremism and prevent it or root it out before it takes action, we were going to need the cooperation of Muslim communities in this country. They may very well be the first ones to see it. They're the ones that are going to see radicalization happening at a mosque or hear it in the community or even among their own family members. And so, and the other part is that there's a narrative that ISIS and other jihadists pose that this is a war between Muslims and the rest of the world, and that sort of victimization narrative is something we shouldn't contribute to. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that there is a radical element in Islam, jihadism, that needs to be called by name and needs to be confronted.
About 3 months ago, you were asked whether Donald Trump was qualified to be president, and you said so far you hadn't heard anything to make him qualified, but that you'll give it time. Where are you today, 3 months
Well, the most
later?
important thing a president will be is commander-in-chief, and that requires having an understanding of the complex issues on foreign policy. Foreign policy presents us often with hard choices, not black or white choices. Oftentimes your choices are down to two less than ideal outcomes, but you got to choose which one is the best one for the country. I personally believe he continues to struggle to articulate that.
So that makes him unqualified to be commander-in-chief?
Well, as of now, obviously, I think I'm the most qualified. That's why I'm running.
Most qualified. Is he qualified at all to be commander-in-chief?
Well, again, I have very strong reservations about what he's expressed up to this point about his understanding on some of these critical issues before our country. He still has another month before the Iowa caucus, so we'll see if he does it. But so far, I don't think. Well, he hasn't done it so far, but he's not alone. I think others in the field have confused us as well in terms of where they stand on some of these issues.
You just said that you thought the president's speech made it worse. If you were president in a moment like that, what would you have done? What would you have said?
Well, I first would have acknowledged. Well, first I would have acknowledged why people are concerned, and I would have acknowledged that we are. That this
acknowledged it.
But beyond just acknowledging it in the way he did, I would have honestly said, look, I know people that are. I personally know people that have told me they're not taking trips this New Year's because they're afraid of what they're reading in the press. People that have always taken a trip at the end of the year. So this, perhaps it's anecdotal, but I think it's happening. But then I would have ended by saying, but we can defeat them. What we're doing now is not enough. Here's what we're going to do in addition to it. And I honestly believe that, yes, we need more airstrikes. You can't just defeat them from the air. You must do two additional things that we are not doing now. Number one is put together a global coalition on the ground made up primarily of Arab Sunnis. Obviously, we'll work with the Kurds in the Kurdish areas and even with Christians to protect their cities and their families. But ISIS needs to be defeated on the ground and rejected ideologically by Sunni Arabs themselves. And it will require embedding alongside them special operators from the U.S. and other international partners. And the second is we need to start cross-messaging these people, counter-messaging them. You know, propaganda has always played a role in every war and every conflict. And this is critical here because ISIS is portraying themselves as this extraordinary caliphate, that life is glorious under ISIS rule. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so we need to invest more time, for example, explaining to people what happens to non-Iraqis that join ISIS. They're treated as cannon fodder.
Everything you just outlined, though, the administration would argue that's all part of their strategy. It sounds like you basically agree with the president's strategy. You might just implement some parts of it differently.
I don't agree that's part of their strategy. Maybe rhetorically some of it is, but most of it is not. For example,
we have a propaganda program that, frankly, outsiders have said hasn't worked and maybe government can't be behind it.
I don't believe that we have.
You think government can do?
I don't think a couple of Twitter
do an
feeds.
anti-propaganda.
Well, I don't think a couple of Twitter posts from the State Department is a true anti-ISIS propaganda.
Radio Marti? I mean, you and I are familiar with it.
Absolutely, but it would also require us to work with Muslim communities around the world that are not Islamists to counter-message to young people, to counter-message to them about why this is not true Islam, as these Muslim leaders argue, and in fact, what life under ISIS control is like, much more widespread than what we're doing now. And on the ground, I do not believe that the president is doing what I'm outlining.
Your campaign has been pretty critical of one of your rivals, Senator Ted Cruz, for his vote on the USA Freedom Act. And Senator Mike Lee of Utah, somebody that you have a tax plan with, you guys are certainly allies on a lot of things. He has said that your rhetoric has been not based in fact, and that it is not true what you've been saying, that somehow federal officials can't track, use the USA Freedom Act, use the courts to track the phone numbers that are necessary.
Well, on this issue, not only is he wrong, but others that argue that are wrong. We had a program that allowed us to collect the phone records, basically the phone bill, not the content of your conversations or your emails or anything like that, just your phone bill of every American, and it was stored. Only 16 people in the U.S. government could look at it, and they could only look at it if they got a court order from the privacy court, from a FISA court, to go in and look at those phone records. And they retained them for a significant period of time. Under this new law, we are trusting the phone companies to hold those records. And all of these phone companies have different periods of time when they hold it. Some will hold it for 18 months, some will hold it for 6 months. This is a valuable tool. If in fact you have identified someone as a potential terrorist, or if in fact someone carries out a terrorist activity, the ability to look at who they've been calling and who they've been talking to is part of a larger puzzle that you can put together to see what network they've been working with, who they've been communicating with. We have now lost that capacity in many cases.
So is this a commander-in-chief test for Senator Cruz?
I believe it is for all the candidates. You know, in the case of Senator Cruz, my argument is it wasn't just the intelligence vote. I mean, he talks tough on some of these issues. For example, he's going to carpet bomb ISIS, but the only budget he's ever voted for in his time in the Senate is a budget that cut defense spending. By more than Barack Obama proposes, we cut it. He voted against the Defense Authorization Act every year that it came up. And that is the bill, and I assume that if he voted against it, he would veto it as president. Well, that's the bill that funds our troops, even the Iron Dome for Israel. So I guess my point is, each time he's had to choose between strong national defense and some of the isolationist tendencies in American politics, he seems to side with the isolationists. And this is an important issue to have a debate over. It's not personal.
There's been some questions on some of even your supporters and people that are pulling for you, and that say, where's Rubio going to win? He's not playing to win Iowa. He's not playing to win New Hampshire. And at some point, you know, Donald Trump aside, you got to win if you're going to win the nomination.
Look, we'll all be judged at the end of this race. So if at the end of this race things don't work out, then obviously we'll be subject to criticism. Let's wait and see how the votes are counted. I feel very confident in our plan. To be honest,
Are you trying to win Iowa?
I'm trying to do well and win everywhere we campaign. I'm not running for second, third place in any state in this country. Obviously, these races are very different. I'm trying to win everywhere that we campaign. I mean, I always strive for first place. That doesn't always work out that way, and in many of these elections, strong second place is viewed as a first place, but you can't campaign to finish second or third.
You are now viewed as the establishment favorite. How do you handle the word establishment?
Well, I know that it's meant as a slight, and quite frankly, I've had my share of run-ins.
Do you feel like that is an attack?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think it accurately reflects my history. I mean, I wouldn't be in the Senate. The establishment didn't want me in the United States Senate. I have consistently voted against many of the things that some people who you would identify as the establishment are for. When I chose to get into this race, I had a lot of people come forward and tell me I shouldn't run, that it wasn't my turn. And by the way, if I was the establishment favorite, I would have raised a lot more than $6 million in the last quarter. That all being said, the truth is we ultimately will need to unify this party. The Republican Party cannot be elected unless it is together, working together in the same direction. And that alone is not enough. We can't win without unifying our party, but we can't just win by unifying our party. We must also attract new people to our cause. And we do that not by changing our principles, but by applying our principles of limited government, free enterprise, and a strong national defense to the hopes and dreams and concerns of everyday Americans, some of whom have not heard from Republicans in a very long time.
Are you going to work to overturn the same-sex marriage?
Well, I disagree with it on constitutional grounds.
But are you going to work to overturn this?
I think it's bad law, and for the following reason. If you want to change the definition of marriage, then you need to go to state legislatures and get them to change it. Because states have always defined marriage, and that's why some people get married in Las Vegas by an Elvis impersonator, and in Florida you got to wait a couple days when you get your permit. Every state has different marriage laws. But I do not believe that the court system was the right way to do it, because I don't believe...
But it's done now. Are you going to work to overturn it?
Well, you can't work to overturn it.
Sure, you can do a constitutional amendment.
Well, as I've said, I don't believe that would be conceding that the current Constitution is somehow wrong and needs to be fixed. I don't think the current Constitution gives the federal government the power to regulate marriage. That belongs at the state and local level. And that's why if you want to change the definition of marriage, which is what this argument is about, it's not about discrimination, it is about the definition of a very specific, traditional, and definitional change. If you want to change it, you have a right to petition your state legislature and your elected representatives to do it. What is wrong is that the Supreme Court has found this hidden constitutional right that 200 years of jurisprudence had not discovered, and basically overturned the will of voters in Florida, where over 60% passed a constitutional amendment that defined marriage in the state constitution as the union of one man and one woman.
So, are you accepting the idea of same-sex marriage in perpetuity?
Well, it is current law. I don't believe any case law is settled law, any future Supreme Court. And ultimately, I will appoint Supreme Court justices that will interpret the Constitution as originally constructed.